Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how to create podcast thumbnails that get clicks and that get a lot of clicks. So first of all, let me explain why this is important, right? So you have a podcast, it is interesting, and the views are quite not at where you'd like them to be. That can happen for many reasons, but I'm pretty sure your podcast is interesting. But on YouTube, what actually matters most before people actually even start watching is, we say don't judge a book by its cover, but it's kind of how it is on YouTube. Like if someone hasn't seen your podcast yet, it's the first time they see your thumbnail or video appear on the YouTube homepage in their suggested feed. When they see the thumbnail and actually attracts and grabs their attention, they're going to click. And once they click, they're going to watch the video. But if they don't, unfortunately, you're not going to get that view. So it is very important because people judge your podcast by its cover, your podcast episode in this case on YouTube, right? So I'm going to walk you through the 4 steps we need to cover in order to create great podcast thumbnails. Let's just get right into it. So the first thing is that you need to think of a phrase that contextually fits your episode. What do I mean by that? It actually needs to be a very short phrase. And let me come up with something off the fly, right? So let me just fire up ChatGPT, and here I ask for it to give me a really random podcast topic, right? I'm going to do this off the fly so that you can see exactly how this is done. So it gave me the curious mind, why we remember dreams we don't understand, okay? So, at first glance, this is just a piece of text, but let's say that this would be the title. Of course, you mention the podcast host in the title as well. For example, the guest, especially if the guest is someone that is known for that particular thing, so that people can actually trust that podcast episode. But let's take it to the next step and actually think of a phrase that could be very attractive for the thumbnail, and it would be short. What I mean by short is really short, like 3-4 words tops. So please give me, you can actually go to ChatGPT and ask it to do that for you. Attractive phrase that I could use on the thumbnail of this episode. Let's give it a sec to load. So here it is. I asked for it to give me 3 to 4 word phrases that could be used for the thumbnail, right? And let me pick one of them. I think that the signs of nightmares, or actually the mystery of sleep, could work really well here. So we've got that phrase. What's the second step, right? So moving on, what we actually need to do is we need to look at your competitors' thumbnail. It's important. Let me explain why. Now, what I mean by competitors is not necessarily like go find a random podcaster such as Lex Friedman or Joe Rogan. That does not mean specifically that. This is not specifically your competition. You might be creating a podcast about something completely different when it comes to the topic, right? Plus, Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan. Take a look at Joe Rogan's thumbnails. They're very simple. But you know why people click on them? Because they already know Joe Rogan. Who doesn't know Joe Rogan? Bet you could ask a grandma, she would know him. So people already know, they actually really recognize that background behind the guests. Also, this video is promoted by Loopcast. Loopcast automatically identifies new uploads of your podcast and creates short form content to promote it, and then publishes that short form content to your socials automatically, fully autonomously while you sleep. So it's really simple. We're actually building up a waiting list of people to see if there's actual interest for this. So if you could benefit from this, we'd really love for you to join our waitlist. So, they really trust Joe Rogan in the first place because they've already watched their podcast. They know that they can find value there. But that might be not the case for you because, these podcast hosts, they've got millions of views, millions of people who already trust them. So Joe Rogan, in fact, doesn't even need to care about these. You do because your podcast is not big enough yet. I bet that on older videos, Joe Rogan even added, text. This is actually very old, but even 12 years ago, Joe tried to at least add some text to those thumbnails and stuff like that. Back in the day, it was completely different. There was less competition. But coming back to the topic, what I mean by that, you actually don't even need to look at competitors specifically who create podcasts. You can just take a look at, let's say, I just input that phrase I mentioned, the mystery of sleep, right? And we can just take a look at a bunch of thumbnails, that show up in the search results. Also, we can use different phrases like why we dream podcast. And you can just find a thumbnail that actually grabs your attention. I think Andrew Huberman, actually, he's pretty much very close to that kind of topic, that kind of niche. We can take a look at his thumbnails as well. We can get slightly inspired, but we also do not want to copy his style entirely. Obviously, we do not want to copy anyone directly. So basically, just pick a thumbnail that already grabs your attention. Ideally, a thumbnail that is an outlier video, so that creator's particular video performed exceptionally well in comparison to other videos they had. That means that the thumbnail was very clickable. And we'll get back into this in a second. I'll show you which thumbnail I'll use exactly for our podcast so that we can get inspired. But the next step is actually to gather images of your hosts, of your guests, actually, I wanted to mention. Hosts and guests, ideally. Or just the host, if perhaps you're doing a solo podcast. But the point is just get pictures of the people that are actually speaking in the podcast, okay? The next step will be designing your thumbnail. You can use Photoshop or Canva, or you can use AI. And that's what I'm going to do today because that's the quickest option and it literally requires no technical expertise. That step, I'm just going to use thumbfat.st, and it basically allows you to explain what you want your thumbnail to look like. So here we're going to start with adding people. Okay, so we're going to add person. Let's just add a random person. Okay, so in here we're going to put this woman. We're going to upload that image. Boom, and then we just select post, create person, add a person. Second person is going to be Andrew, and we're going to add the image of Andrew Huberman right here. Boom, create. This is going to be the second person. And moving on, we're just going to click thumbnails, new thumbnail. We're going to select add style references. And I actually already found this reference podcast. And why did I pick specifically that podcast? Well, that was because I actually found this thumbnail. Let me just show it to you right here. It was this thumbnail. And I saw that this creator on average gets actually between 100,000 views to sometimes a bit more, sometimes even less, but around that. And what actually happened here was this podcast specifically got 2.3 million views. So that is considered an outlier video, right? So it got a lot of views in comparison to other thumbnails. And keep in mind that, long term, you're going to want to have like one specific thumbnail style. So what you can actually tell here, the AI, is first of all, let me just add the host, add person 2, and then I'm just going to input the prompt. But what I'm going to ask it to do is I'm going to ask it to use like a different color scheme. And just let me show you the exact prompt I'm going to use. So this is the prompt I'm going to input. The one on the image of the one must be on the right. The man must be on the left. Sorry. And the text must say the mystery of sleep, like we mentioned earlier, right? And the image in the middle must suggest dreaming. Our brand colors are red and black. Okay. Let me just click generate. We actually cannot use the image of Andrew Huberman because this is against the policy of this application. So let me just find an alternative person. Let's say that would be a less popular guest, almost like Andrew. Let me add that person. I need to upgrade that. So let me just go to persons, Andrew Huberman, and let me just save those changes. Thumbnails, add person, Andrew. I'm going to add this reference specifically. I'm going to leave the prompt exactly as it was. I'm just going to click generate and let's see what this gives us. And boom, here is the result. And we can keep iterating. So perhaps you might not want to use yellow text. So please keep the text red as well. And please make the characters have serious face expression. You get the point. And do not add any logo in the top left because that is not our style. Or we just don't want the MBB sign. Boom. And this is what it gives us. And this is actually ready to use for your podcast. This will get clicks. Now we can just download it and use it. So long story short, what did we actually do? So we did a bunch of things. First of all, we thought of a phrase that would match our podcast title and topic. Next, we looked at our competitors' thumbnails and we identified a pattern that works with a text in the center, an image right there, and also people on the left and right. That is pretty standard, but it actually also kind of made the image here similar and made sure that the font we use is actually relatively similar to what we had for our competitor, right? And also adjust the size of the guests. Moving on, we gathered the images of our hosts. We actually had to change the image of Andrew Huberman because unfortunately that did not let us through because Andrew Huberman is too popular and AI avoids cloning popular figures, but we still handled that. I'm assuming that, as a small podcast, or someone who runs a small podcast, you probably will not have Andrew Huberman on your podcast. So hopefully, I of course wish you to get Andrew Huberman on your podcast, but at this stage, I think this might not be an issue for you. I wish for you to that be an issue for you, of course. But moving on, you got to design the thumbnail. That is actually the simplest step with AI. With the power of AI, you can just design it very easily and quickly. Super simple. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you found this helpful. And I'm going to leave a link to all the tools I used